In the movie The Dark Knight, our main protagonist gets told at one point, "Why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves back up." That's all fine and dandy, I think, but Bruce Wayne never saw Charles Oliveira get slumped as bad as I had to watch him get slumped. And, I understand since my initial recap video for 317, there hasn't been any content. Nothing's been put out on the channel. I've been pretty much MIA, and that was purposeful. I've just been sort of trying to find the will to keep existing, I guess. And you know what? I came to a conclusion in the deepest depths of despair that I had found myself in, and the conclusion that I came to is, it was either I come back to this or I hire a bunch of male escorts and illicit substances and just try to, not be around much longer after that. Because once you do that, that's pretty much the end. That's pretty much rock bottom. I don't think there's really any coming back from that. And you know what? I decided that that's still definitely on the table, for sure. But I'm going to do my best. And I think that obviously, as we stand right now, Ilia Topuria, the only fight that I think we all want here is against Islam Makhachev. Of course, I'll take a fight against Arman Tsarukyan. I think there are certainly aspects of that fight that is very, very, very interesting for sure. However, just watching Arman Tsarukyan step into range with a shitty 1-2 without any setup, without any danger, and getting cracked by Joaquin Silva that badly, it's hard, right? To see Oliveira just step in and crack him with a right hand without, much setup at all, it's a little like, well, man, over a 5-round fight, fuck, you better be careful fighting Ilia Topuria. Now, of course, with that being said, I do think it is very important to note that, the danger when it comes to fighting Ilia and the danger that's going to be there for Islam Makhachev in this matchup is not exposing your chin. All right? I don't think at all that you can't allow Ilia to touch you. That's just not true. Again, you look at this sequence right here. Ilia lands some pretty fucking uncorked overhands and hooks on Oliveira, but Oliveira just did a good job hiding his chin here, took the shots on the temple, and he seemed completely fine. It was the moment that he overextended and got cracked right on the chin with a shot he just didn't see coming that he got slumped. I mean, this is just to highlight what is truly so impressive about Ilia is the timing and the accuracy over the raw power. I think that, honestly, if you were to line up Michael Chandler and Ilia Topuria on the power cube, Chandler might be able to generate more force overall, but Ilia is just so much more technical. His timing and his accuracy is so much better, and his ability to really put his body behind punches in the middle of combinations is what is so impressive about him. It's more so the technique and the skill over just, raw athletic ability, though, obviously he does have both. And I think that, there are going to be things that you can do to mitigate this. But again, the hard part is Ilia Topuria is extremely well-rounded on top of how dangerous and how accurate he is with his punches. So surviving a 5-round fight is difficult to do against the guy. But I really think, the only person that stands a chance really would be Islam. Now, interestingly enough, though, right, because as we stand right now, Islam is moving up to welterweight to fight Jack Della Maddalena. And Ilia has, of course, expressed that, he would love to move up to fight Islam at 170 and go for a third belt. He hasn't really called out JDM, though. And I think that's interesting. I mean, just gauging Islam and JDM, I think there are some plus or minuses with each person in terms of what their skill set is. But, starting off with Islam and exactly how he matches up to Ilia, I think that, truthfully, the one big problem for Islam here against Ilia is he doesn't have great footwork on the feet. I think that, of course, like I've said about a million times, Islam is very good on the back foot. He has decent head movement. He's not easy to hit clean. And I think it essentially comes from the fact that he is extremely risk adverse, which is huge. I mean, obviously, the one time he got knocked out and finished really early on in his career just stems from the fact that he just stepped into range, was way out of position, and was right there to get countered cleanly. So now his entire game is built around not doing that, not running into punches, always moving away, always staying safe. And of course, that's big against somebody like Ilia, but here's the problem. Islam has a tendency to back up to the fence, and I think that is obviously a massive problem against Ilia Topuria. Now, of course, against somebody like Volkanovski, who's not known for power, who's not going to knock you out with a single shot, just backing straight up like this is fine. But against Ilia Topuria, you have to use your footwork to angle out and circle away. And there were just a lot of sequences in this fight in particular where Islam just wasn't doing that. Prior to the Charles Oliveira fight, every single knockout Ilia ever had was unequivocally always up against the fence. Now, of course, that's not to say that he's physically incapable of knocking you out somewhere else, but obviously, if you're trying to stay away from him, if you're trying to move laterally, that is where you're probably going to end up at some point, and that's going to be a fucking problem. Now, you look at Max Holloway. Max Holloway's entire game on the feet is the fact that his footwork is such a problem. He's so good at keeping the fight in his range, lighting you up with volume. When you try to extend in with, hooks and overhands, he's amazing at sliding right out of range and then immediately putting the pressure back on you. And, again, this was clearly working against Ilia to a certain extent, until it fucking wasn't, right? And Islam Makhachev doesn't have the footwork that Max Holloway does. I think that Islam historically is less hittable than Max Holloway, but it comes from the fact that, again, he's just so much more risk adverse. Like, Max Holloway wants to kind of be in the fire a little bit so he can light you up with volume, so he can just barely slip out of range, so he can find his offense. Islam on the feet is pretty much defense first, find counters second. So again, it's a little bit different, but I do think overall on the feet, this is a very, very scary fight for Islam. I mean, you cannot give Ilia Topuria this sequence right here. I mean, you just can't do it. But I think that, somebody that would be able to contend with Ilia in these areas and probably get the better of him would be somebody like JDM. I mean, JDM, I think, truthfully, is probably more technical than Ilia Topuria in terms of the boxing, in terms of striking overall. And the reason he's more technical is because he has to be. He doesn't quite have the same power up at 170 that Ilia does at 145, 155. So he needs to have longer combinations, better footwork. And I mean, God, you look at some of these fucking sequences against Belal Muhammad. Look at how he's switching stances mid-combination. Look at how even when Belal is just in his face pressuring him, look at these angles he's cutting. He's slipping punches, finding counters, constantly moving. I mean, dude, this fucking one right here slips Belal's jab to the outside, hits a right hand over the top. This right here is elite fucking footwork. And again, like, the only reason Belal could even get him up against the fence like this is because Belal's entire game is to be big and to be girthy and to be durable. But like, how the fuck is Ilia Topuria gonna pressure JDM all the way up against the fence? Like, that seems so hard. Like, Ilia's not just standing in the pocket eating these shots. I mean, there's just no way. So it's so ironic and sad, though, that the only way I can find solace in this entire Ilia Topuria chronicle at 55 is just comparing him to real welterweights as the only thing that's allowing me to sleep at night, knowing that somebody fucking 2 weight classes higher than he came from could probably beat him. But, again, right, you look at some of these, like, very subtle sequences when JDM was fighting Bilal. The fight opens up. He's constantly going to the body. He's using the jab very well, keeping up a very tight, disciplined guard. And look at this sequence here. Lands the jab, feints his level downward, and then lands the right hand over the top. I mean, this is fucking good. I think that he would control distance very well out in space. I think it's going to be really hard for Ilia to get on the inside with JDM fighting off of his jab so well. And, look, on top of that, though, Ilia Topuria has never thrown a body or a head kick in the UFC. I mean, obviously, he just doesn't really need to. But JDM is a very all-around good striker. He does have very good leg kicks, very good high kicks, body kicks. Like, he can mix it up very, very well. But also, because Ilia doesn't throw body and head kicks, it would allow JDM to use a lot more, like, pure boxing head movement, which he used at times against Bilal. But the problem with doing this in a kickboxing or MMA context is you trying to slip and use, like, head movement this low is just going to make you run into head kicks. And even with, like, a good guard, if you slip into a head kick, it's not gonna fucking feel good. That's why you can't really use this that much. But against somebody whose offense is so linear in the sense of, purely being boxing more or less, head movement like this is gonna make it even that much harder for Ilia to land cleanly. Obviously, on the ground, his scramble ability is elite. Like, I just frankly don't see many advantages here for Ilia, and that's kind of why I don't think he's really calling out JDM, to be honest with you. But, of course, right, the big thing when looking at a fight with Islam, obviously, it's going to be Islam's grappling. And I think that, man, that Oliveira fight would make some Ilia fans a wee bit nervous. Because, again, Ilia was very honest about the fact that he did not put on any extra weight to move up to 155. So, his lean body mass was probably only a little bit better at 55. For the most part, though, Charles looked a lot stronger than him in a lot of these exchanges. I mean, you look at this sequence right here, the first sequence that Charles shot on Ilia. He slips the jab, chains it into a takedown. Ilia defends very well, as you see here. Gets his hips back, grabs a good cross face on Charles, trying to push his head away. And despite having really good defense, Oliveira still just runs all the way through, grabs double unders, and he does look a lot stronger than Ilia here. Of course, Charles ends up going for a trip, but right before he goes for it, Ilia grabs the underhook on this side right here, which does allow him to come on top. But, I don't know if Charles really cared about that. I mean, he did the same thing against Beneil Dariush, did the same thing against Islam. But, regardless, going back to this sequence right here, again, Ilia cracks Charles with some shots right over the top, right on the temple. Charles eats it, immediately just steps forward, grabs a tie clinch. Ilia almost gets knocked over trying to get away. I don't think he looks very physically strong in these exchanges. And I think that could be a big problem against Islam Makhachev. If Islam were to take Ilia down, I don't think Ilia is going to get back to his feet. Now, I have to say, I think, because frankly, there's just not a lot of examples of people taking Ilia down. Like, it just hasn't really happened. So, it's impossible to be definitive about this. But I think Islam, next to Khamzat Chimaev, is the best grappler in the UFC. I don't think anybody is quite as well-rounded as Islam is. And I think the only question is Islam gonna be able to take him down with shots out in the open? Obviously, he had a really good takedown sequence against Renato Moicano out in the open. Obviously, though, historically, he struggles hitting takedowns out in the open. It's something that we talked about in depth in my last video about Islam, if you want to learn more about that. But the cliff notes, essentially, Islam needs to get you backed up to the fence for his takedowns to become a serious problem. But pressuring Ilia Topuria up against the fence is gonna be difficult and is always going to be extremely dangerous. And I don't know if he has a reliable way to get him backed up to the fence. Overall, I really think that's what it comes down to. I think that on the feet, overall, Ilia has a very big advantage. on the ground, obviously Islam's going to have a really big advantage. And it's just going to come down to the fact that Islam, over 5 rounds, needs to hide his chin the entire time. He cannot give Ilia any opening because Ilia is just fucking way too accurate and he's way too dangerous. Islam cannot back up straight to the fence. He needs to be very mindful of moving out in space and then constantly looking for the clinch at any possible opportunity. And then for Ilia, he just needs to essentially survive all the grappling exchanges and look for that one singular moment of landing a shot clean. I think it's an extremely interesting fight, and I think that, obviously there's way more specifics to look at, but overall, I think that is what this matchup comes down to.